Well, I worked with our team here, Aiden and Asa, for many years. And I think the question that Richard, I think it was you that brought up is, hey, this is like a very old market. It's been here for 20 years. Like, how can it possibly be different? And I think first and foremost, I would say that all the companies that you mentioned, whether it's Symantec, Blue Coat, or ForcePoint, WebSense, these are companies that actually all of us, Aiden, Asif, myself, we worked at for many years. And when it came to dope security, ultimately, beyond product, our goal is about building something different. And in the Bay Area in California, dope means very good, right? And interestingly enough, you cannot go 5 minutes without saying dope in the Bay Area. Every 5 minutes, somebody will say, hey, that's a dope coffee shop. Oh, hey, that's a dope Airbus plane or something like that. They will always be saying, hey, that's dope. And the idea behind that is to bring a little bit of that California culture into the world, which means that everything you do, you have a lot of passion towards it. You're very proud of it. For us, we believe in design, the most amazing UX design you could imagine. So you can see it on the screen here, how much we care about that. And last but not least is a very strong attention to detail, which is where we try to be different than what we've seen in the past. I think you all probably have seen this with a lot of cybersecurity software. It's very complicated. The documentation is bad. The UI is very slow. It's not easy to get up and running without training. So what we'll see today is how did we go from those three key vision points to building a product that makes a secure web gateway and soon a CASB and a private access as well, much, much better than you've ever seen before. So first and foremost, we're about 30 people now. We've been around for almost 3 years, and we raised money from basically two main venture firms. The main one is actually Google Ventures. So Google, they have a very keen sense of technology and very, very core technical capability. And for us, everyone in the team is actually technical. From everyone from someone in marketing to sales to engineering, everyone can use the product every single day. So Asif, who's on the call, he's our head of EMEA sales. He actually uses the product and demonstrates it himself. So we don't have that mentality where somebody has never used a product before. From a product management perspective, that was a big problem at these previous companies. And you all can ask this of the PMs you talk to if you talk to any of your sort of suppliers or kind of vendors, if you will. Ask them, hey, can you show me how the product works? And if the PM can't, there you go. There you have your answer. So for us as a team, we all came together from ForcePoint or Symantec really to build something different. And this was done during the pandemic. So ultimately, we had to meet online and in person in a hotel, and we built something I think is truly amazing because we started with what's called the secure web gateway. Now, really, what is that? It's SSL inspection, it's filtering. There's cloud application controls that once upon a time people called as a CASB proxy, but now that's here as well. You can see what shadow IT applications you're using. For example, is somebody using personal Gmail? What Gmail account are they using? And all of this should be available within like a cloud console, of course, right? That's the way it works today. But this is just part one of a three-part journey, right? So part one is secure web gateway. Part two is CASB. So we've seen that. And part three is private access. So that's where we're going. And I'm going to show you the roadmap on all three of them, but I want you to think of it as a Star Wars trilogy. So we love Star Wars at Dope Security, right? So the company was founded on May 4th, 2021. And so may the 4th be with you. So it's a Star Wars trilogy. You have a new SWG, CASB Strikes Back, and Return of the Private Access. And that's the idea. But what was there 20 years ago? So it was a great question. Once upon a time, there was an appliance. It was a WebSense appliance or a Blue Coat appliance, proxy SG or on-prem SIG. And that would be inside your office. And you'd have to install it, configure it, turn it on, and it would work. But that changed, right? 10, 15 years ago, somebody said, look, it's very annoying to have to install this appliance everywhere. And so actually Zscaler was like, well, What if we hosted that appliance for you and you simply GRE or IPsec tunnel all your traffic from your firewall to us? And you think about that and it's like, okay, that's probably fine. You don't have to install those boxes everywhere. But in today's world, around 10-ish years ago, what happened is that everyone said, well, what if you're outside of the office? What do you do? And so the solution was that, well, why don't we install an agent that redirects the traffic similar to your GRE tunnel, except it uses some sort of a software to do that, steers it to the traffic to the data center and from there to the destination. And what we found, at least working at both Symantec and Forcepoint, is that this architecture of rerouting traffic to a data center made no sense at all. And it was really difficult because for customers, it was reliability challenges. If you were in France, you may be getting a web page in a German language. If you were in Germany, you might be getting the web page in a different language as well. And so ultimately, the reliability was not that great. You would have to fail open, you have to disable your agent. The processes were not very good at doing that. It was very slow. Imagine, right? If you're sitting in Frankfurt and the data center is in Frankfurt, it's like mostly fine. It's not that bad. But the reality is actually different, right? We tested this. It's if you went directly to the internet, you would be getting 350 megabits per second. If you're going through the data center, the stopover, you would be getting 100, 150. And so we like tested this against all of these other companies, and it just was not great. And ultimately, it came down to the architecture, right? So we said, what's happening is you're rerouting your traffic from your laptop to the data center and from there to the destination. Now, you think about that, there's a lot of other things that are happening underneath the hood. All of these providers that have existed for decades, they don't support HTTP2 consistently. Some people downgrade from H2 to H1.1. Some people move from only one or two URLs will work with HTTP2. We wanted to fix that, right? And the whole question was, if you were flying from, say, Berlin to Frankfurt, would you stop over in London for a security check? Like, why would you do that? And that is where we came in and said, let's make this different. And what we released is a Fly-Direct secure web gateway. And the Fly-Direct secure web gateway is completely different because instead of you rerouting the traffic to the data center, instead, you're processing everything on the laptop itself. So all of that information is being processed on that device, which means that it's way faster. You can see that clearly. We support all of the latest kind of protocols. It works beautifully whether you're sitting in Germany or you're in London or you're in South Africa or you're in the US or Brazil. It doesn't matter where you are. It will work just fine. But most importantly, it's built with the UX and the design to make this easy, very, very, very easy and effective control for you to manage. And I think, ultimately, coming back to the original question that was asked is, hey, why are you taking on a secure web gateway? Isn't that already been there for a long time? And, people said the same thing about an anti-malware solution, right? An endpoint protection. Once upon a time, Symantec and McAfee 10 years ago were the biggest ones, right? And if you think back to 10 years ago, nobody would have imagined that this would change. And that's what we're doing. And ultimately, that's what happened to them as well. It went from Symantec, McAfee to CrowdStrike, SentinelOne. And now we have Zscaler, Netscope. What's going to be there in 10 years? And so I just thought I would take a little bit of time to look at what is actually happening from an architectural perspective, right? So we have our cloud services up here. That's our analytics, a malware API, a URL categorization API, a policy API, a ability to download the latest software update for the agent. Because why should you manage that upgrade process, right? And all of this happens via a real-time connection to the endpoint, similar to a WhatsApp call, right? If you send me a WhatsApp message, I get it immediately. The same thing happens for our agent. And on the dope endpoint, pretty much what's happening is that you have your laptop, your Mac or your Windows, and every single application will be sent and and captured. Their traffic will be captured. And before it's allowed to exit the laptop, it's sent to the dope endpoint, which is essentially an HTTP2 SSL inspection proxy. And it will do the filtering. It will do the cloud application controls. It will check that against a category cache. And then from there, it will go through the network you're connected to, whether that's a Wi-Fi, whether you're on a VPN, or whether you're on a corporate network. It doesn't matter. It will work consistently. And that's very, very important because people always ask us, hey, what happens if I put dope side by side with Global Protect, AnyConnect, Fortinet firewall, Checkpoint firewall? What happens? And it's like, well, it will work exactly the same way if you were on the hotel Wi-Fi, if you're on the home Wi-Fi, it doesn't matter. It will work exactly the same. The protection is the same and the controls are the same. So I'll take a quick pause here. And, obviously you're all open to ask any questions on the chat, or we can move into a quick little demo.
Yeah, I think Gunther's got a question.
Christoph, Richard, anything from your side?
So we have one question. So I also gave the approval to ask it in person if wanted, or you can also add it in the F&A area.
Yeah.
Okay, we have one question here. How does this technically integrate on the Windows client?
So on Windows and Mac, it's slightly different. So on Windows, there's a driver that we've implemented with the agent software. So it's all part of one bundle. But when you install it, that driver uses the Windows filtering protocol to capture all the traffic and route it to a new destination, which is the proxy that's on the laptop. And that proxy software is about 50 to 100 megabytes of RAM. And once you're able to go in and do that, you pretty much it just runs on your laptop. I'm going to show it on my Mac, which is what I'm on now, but it works very similarly to Windows, almost identical, really. The protection is identical. Everything is the same, but the driver is different. On Mac, it's more of a VPN or a redirector or a network extension kind of a thing.
Okay, great. And we have another one. How much are the dependencies between different low-level NIC drivers? Example, VPN.
So there's not really any dependencies between us and like a NIC driver like a VPN. The reason why I've mentioned it here is because I think it's important to note that if you control the traffic on your laptop, it doesn't matter where you're exiting from, what network environment you're on. So a great example is, we have a few customers that they wanted to implement a Zscaler. And so they're utilizing a Palo Alto firewall, for example, or they may be using a Cisco AnyConnect. And so what happens is the second that they would VPN into their environment, everything would break because you'd be essentially proxying from your device through the VPN, and then from the VPN corporate environment to the Zscaler data center. And then from there, the internet. And so that whole Frankenstein created a mess. And that's why I mentioned it. So, yeah.
Okay, last question. He said, is the dope endpoint port agnostic?
So today we particularly inspect HTTP and HTTPS traffic, which typically happens on 80 and 443. However, if you accessed an HTTP kind of website that's not a non-standard port and it's still using like something that should be blocked, it would still get blocked. So it's technically port agnostic.
Okay, good.
There is one caveat I will say is that we do not support HTTP3 in the agent yet. That is coming most likely this year. We wanted to implement it last year, but it was too experimental still. And so we weren't able to go in and implement it yet with the precision that we wanted it to. Good. Very good. Any other questions so far? Great. Cool. So my favorite part of product is always the demo, right? Because that's where you can really see what makes this product and technology different. And so what I'm going to show you is, just a kind of a day in the life of a user, right? So if I'm sitting on my laptop and device, pretty much what you'll see is this DS logo. And if I click on that, the actual logo itself, it opens up the menu option. It says Kunal at dope.security. And the reason for that is when you install the agent, it requires you to log in using your 365 or your Google workspace. And you get your authentication session inside of the agent. And what's cool is that then I get the policy that is associated with me based on my group or user. And I can see all this other information here, like disable debug mode. I can just press that, and now it's disabled. I can generate diagnostics if I want to. So all of these things are possible from the software. And that's very important because you don't want to be dealing with that and mentioning that yourself. And this capabilities are how we've had customers that have tens of thousands of devices to customers that have 20 devices or 5 devices, or mostly customers have 1,000 to 5,000 devices. It doesn't really matter. It works consistently and effectively. And so what happens is if I go to google.com or if I go to newyorktimes.com, what's happening underneath the hood is that it's all being inspected by the dope security agent. And so see that right there, right? So it's all being inspected on the laptop, on the device itself. And it's done in a very small footprint. I mean, you could see ours is maybe a 50 to 100 megabytes, and you can see almost how much RAM just this one page takes from Google, from New York Times. And what happens is if I access, say, for example, a block page or a malicious page, it would get blocked. And it does not matter if you're accessing this in the browser. And I guess this kind of comes to the question I was asked about ports, but in a different way. It's like, hey, what applications actually work? It also works with, hey, I'm accessing this by curl in a terminal shell. I hope that makes sense so far. So what's particularly cool is that it doesn't matter if I'm accessing that, or for example, if I'm accessing a piracy page, for example, which sometimes shows up with this error here, but you can see that I can completely customize the block page as I'd like to. So it's an Accenture block page here. And what I particularly like about this is that it's very easy to change, which we'll see in a second. Now, let's say we wanted to get more sophisticated, right? So use case 1, right? Block URLs, out of the box categories, take care of it. Great. Now, let's say that I have a user that's using 365, and I don't want those users to access their personal Hotmail account or a different 365 tenant. So if I click on here, you'll notice that it's immediately blocked. I can't access that web page. I can only access the dope security one. And it's very cool because we've extended that control across everything, right? So whether you're on the device itself or you're on a Slack workspace. So let's just say I'm in my Slack workspace. I say hi, it works fine. But if I go in and I click on tribal community, it says, hey, your current network has blocked this workspace and it won't work. So that's where you get the controls, right? I can make sure that only my work corporate tenants are working correctly, but the other ones are not. And you can see the same thing happens. If I go to my browser, it won't work. So love to take a pause here real quick and just see if there's any questions on that so far.
So we have one other question to that one we had before, and it is, what about QUIC?
So as I mentioned earlier, on HTTP3 or Quick, it's something that's coming. Our target is this year, but it was supposed to be last year, but because of the capabilities and the experimental nature of the protocol when we were actually developing this, we weren't able to go in and do that yet, but we will. And that's a core part of the software, is to make sure that we have that available. Today, what we do on Quick is we basically block those particular network transactions, and the fallback happens to HTTP3. So it's a UDP 80 and UDP 4, well, it's a UDP 443 outbound connection.
Okay, the next one, what kind of PII data is going into the cloud?
So we have a very strong like data privacy DPA kind of sitting in our thing, but pretty much outlines everything, right? But when it comes to PII, the transaction level information that's going in, like for example, Kunal at dope.security access tribal.community.slack.com. That is part of the normal URL transaction log collection. So ultimately, that you can consider as a PII because it's email information, IP address information, etc., would be there. But none of the content of the page is ever sent to our cloud data center. So, for example, anything I access here, any of these presentations, none of that's sent, only the transactions. And most of the time, really, the focus is on, hey, what's being blocked? And so that's also stuff that is sent as well. Great. So I think let's transition to what is our real, we talked about the architecture, what we showed right now, that's all possible because of that. But the UX, the design is really where we shine. And what's so interesting about this is that let's say I go to the website, or let's say all of you go to the website. You can actually go in and try this product out right now. You can just go in, go to dope.security and click try now with Google or try now with Microsoft. And once you try it, you'll get an instant production level tenant that you can go in and do that. Most of our customers will sign up just like this, and then we'll just convert them over. And it's not really a conversion process, just adding a license towards it. But instead of clicking here, I'm going to take you directly to the console, and the console URL is Fly-Direct-Architektur. And you just log in with Google and hit Kunal at dope.security. And it's instantly single sign-on. There is no way to access the console without using your 365 or Google account. And what you'll see is that everything pretty much paints on the screen immediately. And you can see that, hey, for example, I am sitting in New York at the moment. So you'll see that my endpoint will actually show up over here. And we'll see that in a second. But everything I accessed in front of you is actually right here. And you'll see just how fast that is, right? So I access transmissionbt.com in front of you. I access gmi.com. I access that using the web portal. And if I wanted to, I can see all that information in a visual graph like I'm seeing right now, that, hey, these are the types of things that are getting blocked. Or I can also look at that in terms of productivity information. Who's accessing what? Where's all that data going? For example, what is Kunal accessing? And what types of websites is Kunal accessing on a daily basis? Now, what's so cool about this is that you can easily integrate this with a SIM, but you can also search for stuff at a moment's notice. Like I can say, hey, what is Aiden doing? Or for example, what is the cloud backend team doing? So all this thing is very, very, very fast. And that's very different than what's been there in the past. In the past, it will take ages, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds to go in and do this. Here, it's very quick. If I go to Shadow IT, I can actually see who is using Dropbox in the company. And you think about that, how useful this is. Because if I click on corporate, no one's using their corporate accounts. But if I saw one, that'd be a problem. But everybody is using their personal accounts. Or I could see, for example, who's using Google and who's using their personal Gmail on their work laptops. Maybe a problem. And so this is where you can implement not just visibility, but control to that as well. And this is where, Dope is completely different than anything else. You come in, there's a bunch of policies, but we have policies assigned to groups. And you can see that here, right? I've assigned Kunal at Dope Security to this, but I could easily add a marketing, for example, or I could add the cloud backend team. Any of that stuff is very easy. And then from there, there's 4 tabs, right? There's the cloud app tab, the content tab, and the bypass tab. So let's say I go into the cloud app tab and I just say, hey, for Google, I don't want people to access their personal Gmail anymore. I don't want them to use their consumer login. Well, when I go to gmail.com, it works fine, right? And this is because it's my personal Gmail account. But if I close out of that, uncheck this box, and hit save, it'll actually immediately update the policy and I can't access it anymore. And think about that, how fast that was. It was almost like a second. It doesn't matter whether I'm doing the cloud apps or if I'm doing it for my content as well. I could say, for example, hey, go to united.com. it works fine, no problem. And then I come back and say, I want to block travel websites specifically for Kuno. Well, all you do is hit save, and it'll immediately save the policy, push it to all the devices. And now I go to united.com, it's blocked just like that. And so this is, again, where we shine and we're different, right? You don't see this happen so quickly, right? I can go to ChatGPT and say, hey, I want this to be a warning page, a specific ChatGPT warning page. And you hit save. Well, come back, go to ChatGPT. It says, hey, are you sure you want to use ChatGPT? So these kinds of capabilities that we have, that's what makes it different, right? It's not complicated anymore. It just works. And you can add bypass lists that are automatically there for you or custom ones. We try to make it so that we've added enough things where if things are bypassed, you won't have a problem accessing the product. And of course, you can always say, hey, I don't want this to be bypassed. It's up to you. And all of this is visible. All the endpoints are visible. You can enable them into a debug mode if you want to. So for example, I can turn mine into a debug mode. It will take the device, immediately put it into a debug mode, generate all the diagnostics from the device. And as you'll see in a few minutes here, everything will get uploaded to the cloud, basically where I can download it and debug what's going on with this device. This hasn't really been possible before. And if you've used a technology like this before, you'll know it has never been this easy. And what we're trying to do is make your life as not just a kind of a customer, but as a partner, very, very easy. And that's about it, right? We have our administration, you have your users where you can instantly enable single sign-on and just import your users and groups from Google or 365. It's very straightforward. And you have your SIM integration, API integration, everything is just there. And it's never really been this easy. And I think for us as a team, we're really proud of this because we've been able to make it easier than anything else. And the bottom line is you're getting a huge reduction in your cost of ownership with a huge increase in your performance. So take a quick pause there. Any questions on that?
So we have a couple of questions. The first one is, where is your cloud service located for customers in Europe?
Yeah, so it's located actually in Germany. So it's AWS. Our backend is AWS hosted, and it's pretty much we try to operate in a way that keeps as little customer data as possible. But there's some things that we just can't do without, right? User data, group data, any of for at least 1 week, we say we'll keep all of at the most 2 weeks, we'll keep all of your like sort of transaction logs, and we just trash them afterwards. On your next question, which is, hey, what details, like what user access, what can it be pseudonymized or restricted to a certain role? So there are viewer roles that you can use to basically make the console read only. If customers typically sometimes ask for some sort of restriction or such, we can do that as well, but we haven't done that in the product yet. It just hasn't really come up, but I can assume that it probably will. So we're planning on that for this year as well. And from an RBAC perspective, you can just change every user's role, right? And it's all single sign-on. So if you add someone and you make their role an admin or read-only or so on, it's pretty straightforward from there. And I think from a SIM integration perspective, we mirror everything that you send or the endpoint send to us. We mirror that into an S3 bucket. And from there, the S3 bucket can be picked up by pretty much any Splunk, QRadar, ArcSight, Microsoft Sentinel. All of them will work just fine. Great. Any other questions?
Not at the moment.
Great. So I think for us as a company, right, we work with our partners here at Acquia specifically because we want people everywhere in the world to be able to enjoy something like this. And specifically in Germany, I mean, you can imagine, right? Like we're asking these questions about data privacy. It is impossible I mean, if you send your traffic to a data center, it's going to get decrypted there, which is infinitely more PII than what we're essentially putting into the product. And this whole product privacy, and specifically it helps with the architecture. You don't have to worry about any of that data going anywhere. It's always going to be on your device. But we've tried not only to just go beyond the architecture and the UX and just make your life easier. A big example of that is SSL inspection error handling. Sometimes this happens, right? You have an error that comes up, it doesn't work. Well, we detect that on your behalf. We're the only product to do it like this, where we detect those errors. You just check, bypass it for your policies, and you're done. That's it. Very simple, very easy, and you're ready to go. The shadow IT we saw, these are both things that we released last year, but I just wanted to highlight them because other products do not give you this level of detail, like what Slack workspaces are actually being used in the company. And that's something that we do today. But this is all a precursor for what's coming out in April, which is called CASB Neural. And we have a few customers already on early access on this. And I can tell you it's absolutely phenomenal. Because what happens is that we basically take your 365 or Google, whichever one you're using. We take that information, crawl it, and tell you what's public or externally facing inside of that 365 or Google. And once we are aware of that, we take that information and we run it through a large language model, like a private GPT, to go in and understand what we call as a dopamine hit. And that dopamine is the summary of the document. Why is it sensitive? And the extractions that are related to it. Let me just tell you, like in the past, this would be a regex, right? Oh, this is the particular German ID number. That doesn't work anymore. It really never worked, actually. And by using a large language model to do this, the accuracy is insanely higher. But most importantly, we've been able to build a capability that is super effective, and it's a one-click authorization. You just authorize it and you're done. And we will be constantly making model updates and changes to make sure that the dopamine works even better than the day before. This is really, really cool. It's very different. And I can tell you, even internally when we used it, it was so helpful because honestly, Google and 365, they don't make it easy to figure out what's externally facing. And I think a lot of you may be aware of that, is that it's just not easy. And so it may not necessarily be that someone has shared something extremely sensitive externally, but it can also be the case. 1,000, 10,000 people, how will you know? And this can help you do that. The other part of CASB Neural, which we call the SSPM part, or the by API access, is what applications have API access into my Google, for example. So a good example would be HubSpot, right? HubSpot is a CRM tool, but it has access into our Google workspace. And it's shown right here, or Slack has access into our Google workspace. And you can see what applications or users have access to that. And this is where you have a one-click remediation, both from a data perspective, you can just unshare the document, or from a application perspective, you can just unauthorize the app. Very simple, very easy. And last but not least is the private access. So this is the capability to do a zero trust network access, or basically more or less a mesh VPN that uses stun to traverse the firewall. So you don't have to reroute the traffic through a data center. It just goes directly from your laptop with our dope security agent to a connector through the firewall, and then lets you access, for example, a Jira or a Jenkins account, something like a server, sorry. So very simple, very straightforward, but it works really well because it's not rerouting the traffic. And this is coming at the beginning of next year. Great. And I will leave you all with this, right? So at Dope Security, everything we make is made with passion and love, and we try to do it the best we can. So on every single one of our t-shirts, on every single one of our jackets, which you will end up hopefully seeing at some point, we say, hey, you have to trust yourself. This is why you were born. Play to your strengths, and be bold, be passionate, and be dope. And I think Christoph is wearing a nice t-shirt there, so we're very excited about that. And hopefully this kind of opens up the floor for any questions.
Okay, great. So if you have any other questions, please paste them in the chat and we will take care of them. So please, so I see there's one other question. Are there any performance impact on the device?
So kind of like we were saying earlier, is that it's about 50 to 100 megabytes of RAM. Sometimes it can be a little higher, just depends on your laptop or device, how you're using it. I think the performance impact of the device is completely negligible, right? I mean, if we talked about 20 years ago, then yeah, sure, 100 megabytes would have been killer. But in today's day and age, like a lot of the functions that we're doing are extremely optimized, right? You're doing SSL decryption. It's not a big deal. Like there's this myth that, oh yeah, it takes so much computing power. That's why you need a data center. That's not true. The reason why you need a data center is because you're pumping 100,000 users through that Frankfurt data center simultaneously. So if it's all going through at the same time, of course it's going to require a huge rack and servers and this and that, multiple fiber optic cables, because how much data is coming in through there? And the world is changing, right? Like, you know, when I was showing the analytics screen, there's hundreds of gigabytes going through there. But at Dope, we're solving a different engineering problem. We are not solving how do you send 100,000 users through a VMware ESX server with a proxy software sitting on it. We are solving how do we build a software that can live on your device, be completely invisible, work beautifully on Mac and Windows, and work for your device 100% of the time. That's a different problem. And also, if there is an issue, we get out of the way. So we do not impact your internet access.
Okay, great. Then we have another one. Why did you decide to build a secure web gateway in such a competitive market?
Yeah, well, I believe personally, the honest answer is that 8 years ago or so, 8, 9 years ago, I was in Symantec, and I was the PM on a few. I was just getting off of DLP and CASB, and I was moving on to some EDR and mostly data center security, OT security. And during this transition, like well, you were always involved in conversations, and anytime anyone needed a marketing thing or a video thing, even though I was in product management, they'd always ask me. And there was a war room that was built in Symantec because Cylance and Carbon Black were creating a huge problem for Symantec at the time because they had AI on the endpoint. And very quickly after that, there was another war room around CrowdStrike and how they have EDR and endpoint built into the same product. And I vowed to myself, if I ever saw this level of frustration again, then we would do it. And I know for a fact that one day, not today, but one day, very soon, within the next couple of years, this decade, we'll see a war room at Zscaler, at Netscope, at Symantec, Forcebank, all these companies, because they're going to be like, what do we do about this product? The UX is insanely better. The architecture is way better. It's way more, it works better than any other product out there. And I know because we've used all these products or we are PMs on it. Aiden is the PM for the ForcePoint product, right? We had to not only do that, but review how does this work on Zscaler? How does this work on Symantec? And to this day, if you go to the Symantec login page, you will still see my face there. And so, yeah, that's the reason why we went in a competitive market, because we know we can win. And we know that we're better than what's out there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Kunal. And I think if there are no other questions, I would say thank you very much, everyone, for listening today. And we thank you that you take the time. And also thank you to you, Aiden. Thank you to you, Asif. And I wish everyone a nice day.
Thank you so much.
I also
Thank
say
you.
thank you. And now everybody knows why we are still trying to sell secure web gateways with a new vendor. Because it's just there's just a lot of exciting things you are doing, I think. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
All right.
guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.